Scott Morrison joins me now. Welcome to the programme.
Hi, Sarah.
This has been described as your secret brainchild. Will history record Scott Morrison as the father of AUKUS?
Well, it may well, but that's really not the point. I mean, today's a very important day. It's a very exciting day for Australia and the whole region. And I'm very proud of our country and the step we're taking. And I'm pleased that the new government has followed through on what was agreed between Boris Johnson, myself and Joe Biden. And that's what they were tasked to do, and that's what they've done.
Let's just go through a little bit of that history. The idea had been explored with the US by previous prime ministers. The answer was always no to sharing that the US's ultra top secret propulsion technology. Yeah. Was it China's rapid military expansion that changed the picture?
Well, it was a combination of events, but that was certainly at the top of the list. I mean, there'd been, since 2016, even in that short period of time, a very significant shift in the strategic situation in the Indo-Pacific, one, but two, also that had implications for what the submarines we were currently building would be able to do. So the strategic environment made them effectively obsolete. And that meant we needed to go on a different path, and we needed to acquire something that, as you said, no previous government had been able to do. Now, that's not a reflection on those previous governments. The answer had always been no, and it had been no to everybody that had asked for this, not just Australia.
But the world in that period was changing. Now, you've called it the most closely guarded secret since the Second World War. Is it true that you kept it from most of your national security cabinet for almost a year?
It is true, other than the Defence Minister and the Foreign Minister. Linda Reynolds was the original Defence Minister, and then Maurice Payne, of course, I brought into that circle, and then obviously Peter Dutton when he became Defence Minister. It was really on a who needed to know, because it was a progressive approach. It was iterative. And when and if a proposition might be able to be brought to the government, that's when we would have that discussion. And of course, the National Security Committee of the Cabinet did that in May of 2021.
Now, when the Defence Chief Angus Campbell advised you to go ahead with the idea, it's been reported that you went into your study to mull it over and concluded that the risk of conflict in the Indo-Pacific couldn't be managed without a strategic submarine capability. So were you contemplating then a future war with China fought alongside the US?
No, not necessarily. It was more about contemplating a situation that we would prevent such an outcome. And to prevent such an outcome, you needed this capability. You needed the counterbalancing influence within the Indo-Pacific that this would produce. I mean, the goal here, whether it was the late Shinzo Abe and the free and open Indo-Pacific or our very similar views on that topic, it was about providing an enduring strategic counterbalance. Now, to achieve that, you need these capabilities.
Now, so not, as Hugh White said there, for America.
Oh, well, these will be ours. These will be our submarines. That was always the intention. Where they're built, I mean, this is a mixture. I mean, the ones as we've learned today, we buy from the United States, well, they will be obviously built there, but they'll be Australian flag vessels. Equally, the submarines, even the first one, will be built over there in the UK, but it will be an Australian vessel under Australian command. And that's the challenge. I mean, one of the biggest challenges here, yeah, sure the dollars, sure the technology, but we've got to get the sailors and the captains and the commanders.
We've actually got Vice Admiral Mead on the programme today to talk about just that.
That's the big challenge.
But AUKUS, of course, is much more than the submarines. It's also advanced technology. It's AI, it's hypersonic missiles, quantum computing, undersea drones. Was it you driving for more than just the submarines? Yes,
and the reason for this is as we worked through the submarine project, it became very clear to me that we don't want to have to go and do this every single time we're trying to jointly develop a capability. So why not all be in the same room at the same time where the idea is conceived? And I think this is going to be a tremendous opportunity, trilaterally, not just the governments, but the private sector of the defence industries in each of these countries getting closer. Now, that's going to have implications for how people move around these three countries, how export controls and import controls work, and that's going to be one of the new tasks, important high-level tasks for the partnership to ensure those obstacles are cleared to get the maximum opportunity out of this partnership.
But, and to be clear, what you're seeing today, does it mirror what you were looking at?
Yes, it does. I mean, what we saw announced today on the submarines was the instinct, intent, ambition, if you like. And it is ambitious, but I think necessarily so,
Now, you mentioned the dollars before. Peter Dutton said on this programme last night that the coalition would back the government in making budget cuts to pay for AUKUS. Do you support the opposition leader's position in that?
Well, I believe that should be the government's position
but
as well.
Do you support the opposition leaders that he will support the government if they need to make,
We've got to make this work.
Budget changes? So
but I want to be clear about something.
Yes.
When we went to the last election, we had a very good understanding about what this would involve, and we went to the last election with our budget set as we did, including what the tax levels were when we went to that election. So we didn't go to the election saying we need to put up taxes or do this to achieve this. What we said is that we had this 18-month process, but we certainly didn't decide to establish AUKUS with our eyes closed. We were very wide-eyed on it. I remember putting those questions very directly to the Defence Chiefs as well as the head of the Defence Department about what would this involve. Because absorbing this, I agree with Richard Marles, and I commend the Minister and I commend the Prime Minister on following through on this 18-month process. This will be a transformative task. As Arthur Sinodina said, who did a great job over there in the US,
it's a moonshot. So we said earlier that you're effectively the father of AUKUS. You're also, to a degree, the father of Robodebt, which is in the news at the moment, wrapped up on Friday. What do you think now, with a little distance, about the trauma that scheme inflicted on countless numbers of innocent welfare recipients? Well,
it's totally regrettable, and it's a very sad thing that has occurred. I only wish that at the time, when we were advised that it was lawful and the Cabinet's mission said it required no legislation.
When exactly was that, by the way? When exactly were you informed of the illegality?
Not until I was Prime Minister, when I was told about it and then shut it down.
Let me just ask you a question about Stuart Robert, one of the ministers who ran the scheme. He told the Royal Commission recently that he knew he was making misleading public statements about the scheme in 2019. But he said he did so because he was bound by cabinet solidarity. That's obviously your cabinet he's talking about. Did you require ministers to lie to the public about Robodebt?
Well, before cabinet, there was no knowledge of it being unlawful.
Well, Stuart Roberts said he had serious doubts about the lawfulness.
Well, that wasn't the government's position, and it wasn't the advice to the government. When that advice came to me as Prime Minister, then we shut it down.
Then why was
immediately?
Stuart Roberts said, in fact, he told the Commissioner this under oath, that he made statements he knew to be false. He said, as a dutiful Cabinet Minister, ma'am, that's what you do. How else can you interpret his statements in the Royal Commission?
Well, I'm not endeavouring to. I mean, he's made those statements, but the provision of Cabinet solidarity are well known, but I can't speak for Stuart's
does solidarity
statements
extend to misleading the public?
Well, you'd have to raise that with Stuart.
Do you accept now that it was both illegal and immoral?
Well, I believe that certainly the legality of the issue has been settled, and had that been raised with the government at the time, Robo-debt would never have happened.
Was it immoral?
I think there was a lot learnt about how, when you industrialise effectively, what is a practice that had been in place for decades. I mean, let's
but I think we've got some, let's not revisit the whole history, but I think what we're looking at here is with some distance. Was it immoral?
Well, look, I think the idea of ensuring that taxpayers' money, which is paid, is done properly, is the principle. And I think that principle is right. But clearly how this was executed on an industrial scale failed that test.
So immoral is a reasonable epithet.
I think I think the outcome, not the intent, the outcome was very different from what was intended.
Let's go back to AUKUS. I mean, one element of AUKUS, which is that you brought it on, as you described, over a year. You worked in a very small group. In that event, the secrecy was effective. But did the same instinct for secrecy lead you also to make your biggest mistake, which was appointing yourself to multiple ministries without telling your colleagues? Was it the same thing at play?
Look, I addressed that in the Parliament at the time. It was an extraordinary time, and you made decisions in the national interest and to put Australia in the best possible position, saving 30,000 lives, saving 700,000 small businesses and over 1 million jobs, I think speaks for itself.
Do you regret the instinct for secrecy, notwithstanding?
Well, I think the circumstances were quite unique, and I made very clear in my statements to the Parliament, particularly when it came to the finance portfolios and the health portfolios.
So there's no link. There's no link between the secrecy that worked for AUKUS and the secrecy you displayed towards your colleagues.
No,
separate things.
Well, they are separate things. You're dealing with different challenges. And in the other case, I mean, there were no consequences of that because none of those powers were exercised ever. In the case of bringing AUKUS to fruition, had AUKUS escaped outside the circle that it was in, then we wouldn't be talking about it now.
Which we were. Scott Morrison, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.